Yay! We are gathered here today to, I also need to share with you guys that my awesome last week was our meeting. And in thinking back on it at the end of the day, that day, I was thinking, you know, the day before, so I'm not sure, we may have met on Thursday. I'm gonna pretend we met on Thursday. The day, no, I know what it was. It was the hour before. 2 hours before our meeting, we met with the team that is arranging the tour, and talked about all of the conditions that needed to be in place for that, and what we needed internally. The conditions externally we had talked about, but the conditions internally of all the stuff we needed. And mentioning all of those things in our meeting, not an hour later, we were already jumping in, and you guys were jumping in and saying, well, let's just do that. And it just felt so delicious. It felt so nurturing to have the conditions laid out somewhere between 9 and 11, and somewhere between 12 and 2, you guys saying, well, then let's just make that happen. And so I'm excited today to dive in and start making some of that stuff happen. I know that, I know, Ryan, you had just sent a draft of the Wikipedia. I'm looking forward to seeing that and going through it. And I'm very excited about it, so thank you for that. And Cindy, you have been working on stuff and sending that along as well, which is awesome. So obviously you sent that before your nap, then napped, and then came in. Just got the link for that. When we set up this meeting, we talked about, because it's so easy to dive into the doing, and Ryan, I saw your notes on the Google Doc that said, this looks like just regular brainstorming. And sometimes we just sort of parking lot, a lot of just stuff, saying we need to download all this stuff so that we don't forget it, so that everybody feels like their ideas are there, and we'll set it aside, and when we need it, it's there. So you're absolutely right. That was all just brainstorm stuff. And sometimes that is a good thing. One of the things I wanted to share, because we were diving into so many things last time about flowcharting, is that flowcharting is just a visual way of documenting causality. So thinking about it internally in terms of the framework, I always love the fact that there's these tools that have existed for so long that really are just ways that we can graphically depict causality. And what I like about flowcharting, even though we haven't yet figured out a way to do it collaboratively, is that you can frequently see where the gaps are. It just, there's something about having it be visual, at least for me, that I can see where the gaps are. I can go, oh, this is where we need to work. We've got all these pieces, but this big chunk, I don't know if you guys remember that there's an old cartoon, I think it was a New Yorker cartoon. It's a physicist at a blackboard. He's got all the equations written out all the hell over the place. And then there's a box that says, and then a miracle occurs. And that's sometimes what I feel like with flowcharts is you got all this stuff and then a miracle occurs. And so what we're going to be filling in some of the blanks of today are those miracles, making the miracles happen. Starting the conversation really with going through the framework. What we noted is we'll begin where we always begin. Listening, which is really just acknowledging the conversations that we've had to date. What is important about these things that we create? Why are they so important? What is the outcome we're seeking? What are the values that we want to uphold as we create these systems? And just spending a couple of minutes just sort of grounding ourselves, getting ourselves in the thick of it. And then considering the for whoms, who will be affected by our having systems and templates for documenting stories. Because the easy thing is to dive in and say, well, we need this for us and the people who will write, because that's the easy one. But whatever we have is going to also impact, for example, the people who are telling the stories and the people who are reading the stories. And so just being certain that we're grounding ourselves in that, in those people. And then again, going through the framework and asking what we want that to make possible for each of those parties, what they need to have, what they need to know, what they need to understand, what they need to believe in order for that result to be possible. And that the templates and systems will pop out of that. I loved, Cindy, I saw it only briefly. I loved we already have templates. We already have questions. We already have an order of things. And they probably will wind up looking very, very similar to that. But having this framing to help us guide through. So let's just start with sort of grounding ourselves in why this is important. What we have been hearing in terms of why this is important, what outcomes are we seeking, what is important in this conversation, and starting to talk about who are the for whoms and what is important about this for them as we've been talking about it. And we've said for the writers, for the people telling the stories, and for the people reading the stories. Reading the stories to learn for themselves. Because I think people will be reading for different reasons. The one that pops to my mind is to learn how to do something. You know, I'm trying to fix this thing with my boyfriend. Oh, good, I can click here. Who else will be affected by our having systems that make it easy to document stories?
I think there's the people who may be the capturer of the stories, yet they may not also be the writer of the story.
So give an example of that.
If we have these, when we have these templates and systems in place, capturing stories will be the norm for everything. You know, like it will not be an add-on, like, oh, we got to go back and get a story. Like it will be our approach to everything is that these templates are part of the conversation. So it's even, I think, you know, the flexibility of the template to accomplish whatever we're aiming for can even be woven into a conversation without saying, okay, now I'd like to capture your story. So
now here's question 2.
Yeah. So, so that sense of flex in what is the capturing of stories going to make possible, and what are the many different ways that can be accomplished in all kinds of settings. So, you know, woven into things people are doing informally, that we all are in the business of documenting change. Like it's always on. It's not like an on-off. Like there's always the opportunity to be equipped wherever you are. And the people who want to make story a part of their world. So there's people who are wanting to learn for themselves of a specific situation and see themselves in story. And there's also people who want to learn, how can I bring this process, this approach into my work? You know, how do we make story, you know, whether that's evidence of whatever it is we're aiming to accomplish, how do we weave this way of being into our workplace structure, community?
Yeah, what's occurring to me as you're talking is, because I can feel my brain going into a flowchart. So there's the person who has the story to tell. There's the person to whom they're telling the story. There's then the person that will input that story into some form of database or whatever. And then there's the person that will take that data and write it, turn it into a story. Then there's the person who's going to obviously post that. That's probably not specific to the template, but it might be. We might have a specific way we want things posted, bullet points or bold headings or whatever, to make it easy for the reader who will read it, and there may be different reasons that they're reading it, and then maybe the ripples from there of whom they will touch with that story, who they'll tell the story, or they'll bring it into a meeting they have or whatever. But it's occurring to me that that whole, every point along that flow is a person, is a for whom that is going to be touched by our having a repeatable way of documenting and sharing the stories.
This depends on the specific situation, but like I remember just recently listening to the Collective Enoughness presentation, and we were talking about how a hero doesn't solve everything, right? And we were talking about how like one, like when you have like a situation like a collaboration, like you don't have just like one perspective that is entering the collaboration. You have multiple perspectives that are coming at it from every direction. So like it's difficult sometimes, like it's hard to think of it that way, because like we think of it as like, okay, there's a person with a story, so there's like the person that is entering something that is like telling it from that set of eyes, and it's like a single input, right? But like kind of what we were describing, like if it's not a mechanistic solution, it's like an ecological ecosystem, you know, it's like you've got inputs coming from every direction. Like if you think of just like our meeting that we're having today, we've got 5 different people, and like every time that like a topic comes up, we're all going to have like a perspective that we're going to share, and like that could be like considered like a story. It depends on how it's developed, you know, but then somehow we have to process that. So I don't know, I'm really curious how that happens, like how those things get melded together, you know. We've got a lot of different perspectives all happening at once, a lot of different stories happening at once.
Yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
I'm thinking of the reality of any story we hear is it's never about that sole person who we're capturing the story from. So the connection to whoever that person is also a connection to all these other inputs, because Sally's telling a story, but she's mentioning Jack and Tony and Sarah and Tom and so that then becomes the story never lives in a box. The story then is connected to the other stories and the other perspectives of the story. And I guess that speaks to the story is never like a polished case statement that's published as a PDF. The story has the opportunity for more plugins, both for what it sparks people and for Sally and Tom and Sarah to add more to the story and keep the story going, and to even tell you a bit more of the history that the first person you talked to didn't know about, because there's actually 5 more years of story here.
Like how to create the template to allow for the plugins that you're talking about, like that would be powerful.
Oh my gosh. Or does the template just repeat itself? So as you go to Sally and Joe and Mary, you just start. I'm loving this.
Well, and also like how much of that is the structure of a template or a process, and how much of it is our culture, the organ, you know, as a community, do we say, hey, I have this story that I think is this story, and this is why it's an important story to me, and I know that because in our community we're iterative and we are all about teaching and we're all about the people, I'm curious to know how Ryan would tell this story. And so I have a, you know, so that's a cultural norm of like, oh, I know I'm gonna share it with someone else, and basically ask someone else to tell the story. It's like a giant game of telephone, right? And see what gets added on, or what is a different story from the same ingredients. It's like a potluck.
It sounds like culture translating into process. So, you know, if there's, for instance, the story that that Christy told of her community during the collective enoughness conversation, where it started out with food supplies not getting to the kids and kids being hungry, and it turned into, after 5 years, pig farmers, and I mean, it just this huge, beautiful ecosystem. Process-wise, there could just be checklist, as we really go down the road here. So if it is a story of me telling, I had this conversation with my husband the other night, and probably don't need to talk to my husband as well. But if we're talking about a 5-year project that involves a whole lot of people, and we probably do want to get that broad perspective. And it seems like we're talking about templates and systems, and I think that there's definitely a sort of a checklist item that says, if this is a big thing, let's see if we can find some of those people. This could be a really big piece.
Yeah, and also the piece of maybe it is part of the checklist of, like, this is as far as I can take this story, and I know that Rebecca is particularly good at seeing the framework within life, and so I'm gonna shoot it, so maybe the checklist says, send this story to 2 other people, and here's a click here for the database of what people are good at or what they are experts in, and off it goes.
And I think I would be personally, and would be very interested in multiple perspectives of the same story if they hadn't read anyone else's perspective. If you just said, this is what we're talking about, maybe like it starts here, or just depending on whatever parameters they might need. But it might actually be important at first that they don't know what the other person said. And it also made me think of this game that's usually done for like an improv game and without a particular story in mind. But it could be interesting if you have those people in the same room, where you go around the room or around a circle, and one person says one word to continue the story. One word or one sentence, but like for some reason that if you have all the people there, it could be really interesting. Maybe one sentence at a time, but like to see how they put it together. But that's a separate.
That's a whole nother. Well, what's coming out of this is that we're really talking about 2 things. We're talking about systems, process, checklists, and we're talking about a template within that and it could be a template. And the template could at some point turn into checklists. I mean, they're certainly related. But if we look at all of those points along that continuum, so there's the person with the story. Let's start with that person. What does our having a routine way of asking the questions, a routine way of documenting the story, what does that make possible for the person telling the story?
They can relax knowing that they don't have to come up with all the important parts of their own. Like, they know there's a framework that they can just plug into, so it's not just them being by themselves.
There's something powerful in that, in being able to say to somebody, don't worry how you tell it, I'll just ask you some questions and you can just answer them. I like that. Yeah.
They don't have to prepare to present.
Yeah. I like that.
And having the questions, knowing that the person who has the story may not even know they have the story.
That's what I was thinking about.
There will be the flex in having these tools in place, is that in some cases, I can send you the questions in advance, because it's not like an in the moment, aha, like, here's some of the things I'll be asking you, because I'm going to capture a story in my community this week with a woman and her 95-year-old mother. And the big thing is the mother wouldn't have to feel like she has to have any kind of decision. what does the mother need to know in advance? And what is a way that her daughter can relay it, that I want to hear a story. But it's you could say that, but it makes even greater comfort to say, these are the types of questions I'll be asking when I come. So that advanced prep in certain situations, again, it's that flex, because it's never going to be a formula. Each time will be a different situation.
Yeah.
I think the template is passing along the culture that you are teaching, training people on. Totally made a face.
So that was a joyful,
Okay.
a love face.
Yeah, like, I don't know. I'm thinking like some of you didn't listen to the podcast yet that I sent, but like it was like this sense that culture is passing an identity. Like we have a way of thinking about things, and like that's the way it is, based on the things that we see and hear and are conveyed to us, and create the way that the pathways that we like look at the world through. So like when we're creating a template, we're kind of creating a synopsis of the framework that you have, and like that's passing that culture that you're building, that you share through the whole beta presentation thing that you do, sharing that in a quick snapshot, you know, so that you in a way you're kind of biasing what you're going to get back. I mean, you may want to do that, I don't know, you know, but like it's gonna impact like how the stories come in, and you know how you move forward with your mission.
What jumped at me when you were talking, Ryan, is that the number of times, and Rebecca experiences this like 17 times a day, that people say, wow, that's a really good question, I never thought of that. And the ability to then say, yeah, this is part of the framework. This is part of something bigger, and if you want to know more, and blah, 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 blah. But I love that. I love that by modeling and walking the talk, we're actually teaching, and they're experiencing something, and we can share more. I love that.
The question that I have is like, is there always going to be processing that comes after the story comes in, and able to work with that information? Or
processing, talk about processing. By whom? Talk about that.
So if you think of like the way that the information is structured, if you like invite a story and it comes in raw form, is that like going to be in the form that we need to, like, all right, so like for instance, I don't know if you call them stories, but like we each have an input that we're making this conversation, right? And then it like in different ways we've experimented with different ways to capture what happened, right? And like that's somebody writing it down, and then it's like, okay, is it in the form that I need to do the next step, or does some sort of processing have to take place to get it to that next step? And like I wonder like how much you can front load that process, where like if you're at a talk and you're like telling people what catalytic thinking is, you can somehow get the stories to come, I mean, you can only control it so much, but like get it to come out in the form that like it's already kind of like what you need to like start going.
Like a shorthand, like a template. The template would be a shorthand to support someone getting their story out in a way that works for them. It's like you can trust that this way works, and it's like it's not an efficiency thing, but I think it is tied to culture. Like these are the things we think are important. These are the types of questions we think are important.
It's like the thing that always bothers me is like, how do you share a culture without influencing what the culture is going to become? Like, you know what I mean? Like if your philosophy is that it just happens organically, and like you don't know what the ecosystem is going to create. Like like you're always having some influence on what that structure looks like, and so it's gonna not be totally natural. It's like hard to have a structure that allows for nothing or no structure.
You're talking quantum physics. You're talking Schrodinger's cat. You're talking that simply by observing, we're changing the reality, and we are.
Yeah.
And we are, yeah. And if you think about the power of changing that reality by changing the question and changing the story, if primarily people have a worldview that says the world is getting worse, when documented fact says the world is getting better, then yeah, let's change that story.
So thinking of a person who often doing a lot of pictures or content or stories and then turn them into something we can use for different places. You know, when and working remotely a lot, I'm usually like, okay, if you're at this event, I want all the pictures, and you can send it to me by text, or you can email it or drop off, like whatever you're comfortable with, but I need a caption. I need to know what's happening, and I need to know who's in it, and I need to know who took the picture. And that, you know, just something simple like that means that the picture can get posted immediately.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think from a processor point of view, I don't think it's anything that requires much commentary on the story, as much as it's like, I really just need like these three things. And sometimes you don't need who took it, but that's mostly if it's a professional photographer. It's just kind of to keep it, you know, this what. So with the stories, I think once that might happen as we start to see the blog come out. You know, if we start like finding the categories or the buckets for the blog, I think we'll start to see what we need. Like, I didn't put it on here because I didn't want it to influence the story, but it could be that on the back are a series of things that the collector could do with the template, and just have like the blog categories, and you just circle the ones that you think it would be, and that just gives the processor something to start with. Or maybe that's where you put anonymous or not, or maybe that's where you know, it's hard to know what we need for the processor until we know how the other places are going to be organized.
So I know that by the time I am done at Creating the Future, 10 years from now, people are going to know more about the Food Network than they're going to know about Creating the Future. But one of the things that I've learned watching cooking competitions is that you always think about what you're going to need in the last 2 minutes as the first thing, so that you're not rushing around with only 2 minutes left and going, oh, fuck, do I need plates? Do I have plates to put it on? And what's occurring to me as you're talking is, we need to know, do I need plates? Am I going to need a garnish? What am I? And so I think that's really, really powerful, because it makes it so much easier on the front end and all the way through if we're thinking about what we need at the end first. And so a big part of that template, I'm loving that, Cindy, because a big part of that template is, what are we going to need in the end? Oh, we're going to need to put it at the blog. Where? Oh, okay, well, if you've got a checklist at the back and you go, this is a story about X, that can get into the database. And this is, again, the person who's inputting the data puts it, there's a field in the database that says, what blog category will this go into? And because then that person posting the blog doesn't have I'm loving that. And one more thing you now know about the Food Network.
Hey, I use HelloFresh, and I still do that. I scramble at the end to like chop the garlic. Well, that made me think. Oh, and if we didn't want if we didn't want anybody to, like, we didn't want any influence at all, it could be like a big label that we stick on later, or like,
We're in the weeds of how right now, but I think that just the idea that we're looking at the for whoms of all of these people who are going to be along the line, and they're all going to need something else from this template. And that's really powerful. I also was noting, and I think you may be the one that said it, Laura, I'm not sure, that one of the things that this template makes possible for, and I know you, Ryan, mentioned it as well, for the person who's telling the story is if they don't even realize they have a story, that they're in the middle of something and we go, oh my God, it is perfect. Can I just ask you a couple questions? The other thing that is occurring to me, having watched people's stories, documented stories, when they come in the email, I tag them and I set them into a folder, is that sometimes, and this may be in the weeds too, so I'll pull back out of it very quickly. Sometimes we're not going to have the luxury of asking them the questions. And sometimes they're only going to give us part of it. So I'm thinking about somebody who took the survey course during the first beta and has been practicing listening and just keeps sending us these beautiful stories of what happened when she stopped interfering and listened for outcomes and listened for values. And that's all I get is that. That we'll have that opportunity then to, as you said, Ryan, sort of backfill from there and go, okay, I've got to process. What am I reading in this story that they're sending? So that I'm not going back at them and saying, could you fill in these 4 questions? And so there will be at times the person who is capturing the story and inputting the data, it may not be face-to-face and it may not be able to ask the questions.
That was making me think a little of, and this is in the tagging of that some stories or some pieces of people's stories that we get can be knit together with other pieces of other people's stories. Like this is a lifelong practice. So there could be a series of things that people have shared with us when they have just started to dip their toe into catalytic listening, that when you put them together in a collection, it is evident that you can start experimenting immediately. And these folks are just like you and started on the path the day after they came to one class. So some way of a tagging, in a sense of, this is somewhere on the continuum, maybe perhaps also, this is in the weeds, but where the person is on the continuum of potential even. These are folks who are just starting to try something new around catalytic listening.
I like that a lot. I think that, like, if you think of like a story coming in and like that is, I'm going to call it an object for lack of a better term, but you've got like one contained bit of information that somebody is sharing, and then that information is, and other information that you get from other places is all contributing to the project or like the overall mission, like some bigger thing, right? And like what Cindy was saying about the blog, like I haven't looked at the blog too close, but like that would be cool if like the blog stories were organizing those stories as they come in. So you're like connecting the dots. You're like, oh, this person might want to know this person, or might want to know whatever. And I've got stories from everybody, and like I can combine those into one article that is a blog article that says these are people who've been connected on this topic and they want to like work towards this thing. And then like ideally like you would have like these kind of meetings, like people coming to, I don't know how you convince people to do that. There's a step there, but like, like if all that stuff was organized that way, like that would be pretty cool.
Oh yeah.
Well, aren't there systems where it's like self-organizing? So it could be set up where if people are submitting their own stories or their own experiences, then part of the template or the checklist is like, answer these 2 questions, like I have been practicing catalytic listening for less than 1 month, more than, like, so they kind of somehow label their stories themselves, and then they make up their own connections. Like people, I don't know, it just seems like there would be a tagging system that people could make up themselves, and we won't even know what's important to the community until someone makes a tag, and then someone, I don't know, they thumb up the tag, and then it becomes more of a tag, and I don't know how that works.
Again, we're down into the how, but what I'm pulling out of that is that it's not only going to be us asking somebody questions. There's not only going to be, I'm capturing a story because Rebecca and I are out and it's like, oh my God, that is awesome. Can you just tell me I have these questions? There's going to be the people who are, like I said, just sharing a story because it was so powerful for them, but also having the ability on the website to say, got a story of how catalytic thinking has affected you? Here's 3 questions. Yeah. So in terms of for whoms, we've got more for whoms.
How would we connect them for now? What Laura is saying is sparking ideas of technology in my mind, but like, if that's not available, like what can we do for now?
Yeah, I mean, there's the what this makes possible for the person telling the story of being able to be connected to other people is awesome.
Another for whom is anyone who teaches, facilitates, instructs on behalf of creating the future.
Yep.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Anyone who is a teacher, instructor, facilitator, learning team member of creating the future. We're constantly weaving story into class. We're also capturers of story, but it currently captures that it sits in my head and then I'll tell you. So yeah, we're also often speaking story depending on who's in the room.
Could we be the betas for, or you be the betas for the online version?
What did you just, can you repeat it, Cindy?
Yeah, can the teachers, the people you were just talking about, can that, when we do have something that people can fill out online, maybe that group is the first one to inform what are the questions that they need.
So, oh, my head is going to explode. There's so what's
Try to solve it.
In the for whoms, we've got people who are going to read the story. So at the end of this long chain, there's people who are going to read this story. It's already been posted. And so thinking about what having a consistent way of, oh, I'm reading these stories and they're all asking these same questions and I'm learning, just like Ryan said, I'm learning the framework by reading all of these stories. They're all asking in the same questions. That's a really interesting thing. I wonder why. You can link over here. But they're going to be reading the stories for a whole bunch of reasons. And this was occurring to me for categories and tags, and we may wind up with just a ton of categories and tags or not. So let me share. One, you guys were talking about where people are along the continuum. So that won't be a category or a tag that we would share in the blog, but it would certainly be something that we would share in the database, because if I specifically want to write a blog post, as Rebecca said, amalgamating a whole bunch of different stories, and it's to a very specific to the I'll try this folks who are on the continuum at that point, I can pull those stories out of the database and cross-reference them against the topic or whatever. So there's that for internal, for teaching, for writing, because writing is part of teaching. There's the practice that it exemplifies. So this is a story about listening, or this is a story about decision making, or this is a story about collective enoughness, or this is a story about all 3 of them. And then there's going to be the topic, and those might be keywords, they may be tags, they may be something that somebody can search on that is, getting along better with my spouse, or, whatever, buying a new house, whatever the hell it is. So I'm realizing that the people reading the story, a big piece of separating them out as the for whoms is, why are they reading it? Some may be reading it because they want to write an article, which is part of teaching. Some may want to just have examples for teaching. So Rebecca, you're going to be focusing in immersion next week on the topic of whatever. You're going to be focusing. You're teaching catalytic listening in immersion, and next week you're going to be focusing on values. You want to be able to pull out a couple stories on values, cross-reference those to personal relationships. So we've got all of these different reasons people are reading, and what this might make possible for the readers who are motivated by completely different things.
And I think too, that also is the opportunity to connect to the humans of the story, because I could go source and see, oh, there was this great story about Cindy with her family and how she took a different approach to Thanksgiving, da, 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 da. So not only like in something in the template of the checklist is, are you willing, a willingness to have your name associated with the story and the variety of what that could make possible, that Cindy, I got this class next week, or could I beam you into this workshop? So it's breathing life into the fact this is a real human being, just like you, like beyond what's on the paper of the story, wherever that could be, is the tagging of humans.
Yeah, I think what Laura was saying about self-organization, the degree to which we can make that natural like that is really important. And I know there's probably going to be some technology limitations to start with, but yeah.
So let's our list of for whoms keeps growing, and that's awesome. Let's talk about the person capturing the story. What does our having a template make possible for the person capturing the story?
Well, like I mentioned before, some kind of efficiency, like that. I don't love that word, but the idea that, okay, I know what to ask, so I don't have to make it up every time.
Efficiency and consistency. Yeah.
Seeing the template as more questions than like a framework, because like I could see how if you're trying to take input and like frame it according to a template, then you're inhibiting your ability to listen.
Yeah, I'm really loving the template as questions. Yeah.
It gives a person confidence. And your prep work, not like, what am I going to ask this person? Like, I'm going to show up with these questions as my guide.
You're always ready.
Mm-hmm.
So you got the questions on your phone.
And as time goes on, that becomes that person's norm of capturing stories. Like that's just the way the person shows up. No different than it's an extension of the practice of action.
I'm already into so many colors in my notes.
I think it would also give the collector of the story, if it's done in a flexible way, it allows them to then give input into changing the template. So as they're using the template, everybody in the community is choosing to use the template, and they have an easy way to influence future questions.
That's crucial. Like if the the template's not flexible, then that throws everything out the window.
So there's some, like, again, this is more stuck in the how, or the weeds, but there's somewhere is the latest version of the questions so that everyone knows, like, ooh, I want to see how it's changed over the last year. I have this old version on my phone. I want to look at the latest.
Yeah.
I think also what we often say, creating the future around catalytic thinking, and I'm going to use a profanity, is you can't fuck this up, and this shit works everywhere. So I think the person doesn't feel like I totally fucked up my opportunity to get that story. Like creating conditions that kind of feeling and thinking is not even there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that there's no missed opportunity, because you can go back to that person, whoever that person was who had the story. It's not like that was my one and only moment to get the story. And to also know you would be supported. So perhaps you can't go back and get the story, but you got the essential information to come back to the team of story capturers, and it can be a collective effort around that story. It's not all on you alone to do the story.
What that brings up for me is another thing that this makes possible for the person with the story, which is that if I am feeling always ready to ask anybody these questions because I've got them on my phone and I'm hearing something that's really intriguing to me, it's honoring that person who's telling the story and doesn't even realize they have something special, which happens so often. We encounter people who are just awesome and doing amazing things and don't even realize it.
Who's making the connections? Like, kind of what we've been talking about with like tagging or whatever. Like, if a bunch of information comes in, like you go and you ask your questions to somebody and they tell their story and then you have it. And then there's like aspects of that story that relate to maybe something somebody else said on the other side of the country, or, you know, whoever else that they're going to collaborate with. Like, how does that take place?
Excellent question.
And I think that's the beauty of the framework. If it's always about relationships, always about people, but then it would then be honoring what would it look like to make those connections, you know, the warm introductions, the connecting of the dots, rooted in the practices being about the people. So every time it would look different, so it wouldn't be so rigid, yet it would not ever be coming in from out of the blue in a transactional kind of way. So it would model this approach, like, oh, there's other people involved. Okay, well, what conditions would they need to know before I send an email asking them about a story? Or Cindy's going to do the outreach because she has the existing relationship, so she'll make the introduction and hand it off to me. So every time it would feel different depending on the situation, but you could unpack it to catalytic thinking every time.
I don't know if this is a different for whom or if it's multiple people along the whole chain, but I was thinking about like how Ryan at the beginning of the call, when you said you were really excited to read the narrative of that book, the description of the book, because it is, I think you said it's exactly what you've been thinking about and trying to figure out how to talk about. And so that idea that, again, I don't know where this is along the chain, but at each point, people feel that like, oh, good, I'm home. Like, yay, there's more like me. And I can take a deep breath because I don't have to think this up by myself anymore. I don't have to wonder if what I think about is crazy or if is it hopeless because I'm the only one thinking about it. It's like, oh, good, there's more of me. And like, oh, I've been trying to figure out how to say that for a year. And look, this person wrote this little story and I found it. And so so then I start immediately into the to-do, which is like, I want that person when I read the story and I get excited about it, I want to be able to click and contact the author immediately. Like, I don't have to go through anyone. I don't have to ask permission. I can just be like, ooh, yes, please. And I want to tell this person how they changed my life. So like, and that's where the self-design comes in somehow.
Yeah, we frequently talk about the power of creating the future is people finding their peeps. Yeah. And the normalizing. No, I'm not going crazy. Is the normalizing. So moving along, so that person is, and I've also added onto this list that somebody is even identifying something as a story. So I'm having coffee with Rebecca. She's just talking about, you know, Zachary's here and I'm so excited, and I'm hearing a story in there. I've identified it's a story and Rebecca hasn't, although that will never happen, but it could happen with somebody else who's not Rebecca, because Rebecca recognizes every story that there is. So somebody identifies a story, talks to the person who has the story, somebody captures that story from that person, and then taking that capturing and giving it to someone who's inputting that into a database in some way. Because, you know, I may be the one that is capturing the story after a talk. I don't have time to write it because I'm moving on to the next thing. But I've got it in my phone. I've dictated it, whatever, and I need to give it to somebody who's going to do something with it so it doesn't get lost until somebody writes it. All of these could be the same person, or they could be different people. So the person who is inputting this data into some form of database, what does this make possible for that person?
You guys have the capability now to create a form that emails the stories in, like if somebody just wanted to do it on their phone, if they're at one of your talks, whatever.
We don't right now, but I don't think it would be that hard.
Okay.
Yeah.
For the people who are putting it into the database, the template will work in tandem with the database. So whatever we create will make it something that's not heavy translation, or I'm trying to shove this in to a system set up for these inputs. So there'll be an ease when I get the story each time, no matter audio or whatever the format is, that they work together well.
I don't know if this is for the people who are entering the story, entering the data, or maybe this is after. But it's something about transparency. Like, I want everybody in the world to be able to sit down and stick their fingers in our database, to be like, mess around with the pile of markers and be like, ooh, that's a pretty color, that's a pretty color. And like, and maybe they come up with something different to do with the data. So they're looking, maybe they read a bunch of stories that they're able to access when or enter stories. Like, they can enter them, if we have it set up right, they could enter stuff straight into the database that could then be searchable. But then, like, maybe they're sitting around and they're a photographer and they're like, hey, I think it'd be cool to have a picture of every person who's ever written a story about dogs in this group. And they just can click dogs, and then they can decide to have this project, and then they can reach out and create community around it, and then they can put their photos in the database. Like, it would just be this circulating, spiraling creation.
And one of the things when we've been working with Troy about the various pieces of web strategy is layers of permissions, you know, which is fabulous. That, you know, different people have different levels of permissions of what they're able to access, what they're able to access, what they're able to see, and what they're able to input into. What else does, I love the what it makes possible for the person inputting the data having to do with how the database is set up in the first place. That the whole thing makes for ease. And the more I'm envisioning a database that is so rooted in what the end result is going to be, we're going to need, again, we've got our plates out. We're going to need the end result is going to be a blog post with categories and tags and back end, we're going to know where these people are in the continuum and et cetera. That having that amount of slots in the database that the person just can input, that the form has given them, the form matches the database, and they're able to ask those questions and input it.
I think a person in this role, and again, there'll be lots of people, and like you said, people could be wearing lots of hats, but the opportunity to maybe see some themes. So as they're getting all these inputs from around the world, oh gosh, there seems to be a lot of stuff coming in around X. I think however the database is set up, tagging and all of that will also allow for that. Yet there could be someone very much who's touching the raw inputs, who's seeing right away.
Yeah. Yeah. And how about the writer, the person who is taking that data and turning it into a story? What does it make possible for them? I can share with you, as somebody who has been the primary documenter of our meetings, that having a template that is, we asked this question and here's the answer, we asked that question and there's the answer, which is, it doesn't necessarily have to be the template going forward, but it's been the template that we've used. Having a template as the writer means I don't have to think. And just as we were talking earlier, that you guys know when I say the writing is flowing, I don't want a day where I've got to tell a story and the writing's not flowing, because I'm just not going to do it. So making the writing easy, I think, is huge. You could almost be a technical writer without having to be a storyteller. You could be a copywriter, a technical writer. I think it broadens the range of who could be writing. That you don't have to be the best writer in the world. You don't have to consider yourself a writer. That it becomes technical.
How would the template continue to be able to grow and change in that scenario? So if you've got meetings like this and there's somebody capturing the story of what happened, and they've got a template that tells them how to structure it, so then you always get a similar output. Like there's an influence there that is impacting what the end is, what the output is. Like we still want the template to be open to grow, right? How do you see that?
I think that's one of the conditions for success. That when we start getting into the internal conditions of what needs to be, it needs to not only, because we're really talking about two things here, and I'm going to put it over in internal conditions so that we don't lose it. One, if the template is going to be evolving and changing over time, one, there needs to be a mechanism, a system for that to happen. And two, there needs to be a mechanism and system for people to know it happened and use it. So we're really asking two different questions of this, and the way it happens could be a team, it could be a whatever is making those decisions and making things happen. But I think that what we really need to be mindful of is is that it's twofold. It's both about the template changing and about people knowing about it and using it.
That's kind of the science of it, is like trying to be able to capture what's happening in the process and understand what's happening.
We're getting very meta here. How do we capture the story of capturing the story?
Is the goal of having a writer that we take somebody might just have random notes or just smooth it out? It's really just like smoothing out the story. It's not really adding much to it, right? It's like you're not embellishing.
I think it's yes and. I think it's a range. I think there could be people who are, so let me give you an example. We could have somebody who documents a meeting. That's just about documenting the meeting. We could have somebody who documents a meeting that literally just, and we've had this happen, where they literally document, here's the question that was asked, and here's bullet points of all the answers. Mm-hmm. And then you have somebody who could do what Ryan did during our first meeting, which was synthesize. That is a skill way beyond just copying and pasting. And then you could have somebody like Rebecca's talking about who's saying, you know what, there were 3 different instances that all happened this week, completely unrelated to each other, but there's a connecting theme and I'm seeing it. That's a different kind of writing. So I think it's a yes and. I think we're going to have a million different ways that these stories are used, and a million different opportunities for people who want to be part of telling those stories.
Yeah, I think that speaks to people are contributing and participating in whatever ways feel good to them, which is what this Creating the Future is always about. So it's not telling you, you must do this way. Like and so you could be the yes and, yeah, I want to be part of that step, that, and that, or I'm really good at this piece and honoring that. We're never trying to like massage them into doing the more, or, people step into wherever they want to play in here.
I think the database will make possible for the writer kind of the tool chest, the biggest tool chest they ever would want to play in. If they want to, and they can go deeper and deeper, like it could theoretically work on the same article for 15 years because they're deepening it and we have more, they're finding more information and more connections and more and more and more. So it could just be a straight description, or then they could build it out. But I would also want then our database or whatever to be able to capture all the iterations and connect them all back, because that's a story in and of itself. Mm-hmm. So I keep coming back to the transparency of it and all of the pieces and parts that we don't even know how people are going to want to put them together.
I love the thought of sometimes, so for me personally as a writer, an idea sort of plays around here and I scribble it down on a piece of paper and it goes into the pile of tiny little pieces of paper that litter my entire life. And then Ryan and Cindy, you will love this. Years and years ago, Dimitri got so sick of soggy little pieces of paper coming into the office from the shower that he got me a scuba diver's slate that goes into the shower that's got a pencil on it that I can write in. So and so you get an idea and it goes in the pile because you got shit to do. But that idea just keeps coming back. And no matter where you are, you're writing down, and sometimes I'll write the same idea 1,700 times over the course of 2 years. And I go through the pile and I go, I've written the same thing on a little piece of paper 1,700 times. I need to get in there and I'm going to take this week and I'm going to really write this. And it's really starting to form in my head. The ability to go into the database and say, I want to write a story about how, dogs in space. and to be able to find those stories as the writer is fueling my creativity and fueling my thinking and fueling my, so I think that at that far end, again, asking Cindy, you know, am I just a technical writer or am I writing something that's really creative in my brain? There's fodder there for bringing the thinking overall. I mean, this really could further dramatically the philosophical and theoretical underpinnings of the framework in saying, wow, okay, Ryan has been thinking about this for a really long time. And he can go in and say, I want 6 stories and I want to play with those.
Now,
So
question about that is, as somebody who gave you a story, who told you a story, if something gets changed in it or added to it that isn't my experience, I might take issue. So is there, there's always this thing with journalism, which I know we're not necessarily doing, but where sources will ask you to read the story beforehand for approval, and like you never do it. I mean, maybe if you're interviewing Beyonce, you let her, but like you never let them. But in this case, there's a different purpose to it. So
well, and that also brings up, so I'm noting under internal conditions, levels of permissions from the people telling the story. Is it anonymous? Is it cited? Is it? Ryan, you had some.
Journalism is always biased, but I think that what Cindy's saying, or at least what I take from that, is that there's a difference between interfacing with the material in an objective manner and an active interpretation. And to get into like the philosophy and the, you know, theory of everything, like there's some interpretation involved in that, and it could be, we gotta talk about like how we want that to show up, because if there's interpretation involved and you're changing somehow, then you're kind of destroying the whole point of the framework. Like the point of the framework is to get the actual story right, and not to change it in any way. Like if you're processing it, like it should. That's the challenge of the journalist, right? If they're processing input from all these different places and they're trying to accurately reflect what happened or what somebody said, when you're piecing it down and you're making it into something simpler or shorter or whatever, there's always some sort of interpretation involved. But like it's hard to like see like exactly what the difference is between those two, but there is a difference.
And the bottom line is that our having the data will make the writing easier, will create opportunities for different kinds of writing. And what we're talking about here are some different pieces of the writing puzzle that really aren't about the data as much as about, you know, what are we doing with the writing? Are we interpreting? How are we interpreting it, et cetera? But I do think that it is important that part of the data we collect is what do we have permission to do with the story.
And also that's part of the culture of,
yes,
you know, in our in our community, maybe it's the Wikipedia model, right, where you cite every single story you touched when you were creating your thing, and you just say this is where I got it from, and then if anyone has an issue with it, then it's part of the public conversation about it. But I think that some of that can be done culturally with support of process that makes it easeful for them to do it.
I'm gonna need to go do pickup right soon. Sorry.
It's okay. Do we have you for a few more minutes, or are you out of here now?
Yeah, for a couple more minutes.
Okay. Because I want to make sure we get reflections from you before. And one of the things that that Rebecca and I have been talking about sometime over the next several weeks. Obviously not while I'm in Florida, but in the tiny little patch between when I get back and when I leave again. We would like to have conversations individually with each of you, just about, as we've been talking about all of this stuff, what do you want to do? What do you want to play with, and what can we do to facilitate that? And if anything, if your participation is, I have been part of this discussion and that's great, that's awesome. If there's something else you would like to do also, that would be great also, and we'd love to have a conversation with you. So I just wanted to make sure you got that before you left, Cindy.
One thing I was just thinking, we were talking, Hildy, about how we often talk about how so many ideas never get out of our head because we think we have to figure it out all by ourselves. And that comes to the same of the story. And if we think of collective enoughness around story to ask, who else cares about this and what resources already exist? I may have a germ of something, but it's really not enough to write something yet. So having some flex latitude in whatever this databasey thing is, to also be able to a space, place to talk about, this is something I really want to get working on. I kind of only have some half-baked ideas. I'd love to have happy hour, Zoom, that thing about connecting people. So connecting people who have pieces of ideas of stories, yet they want to have the collective community to talk about it and explore that, to get it out of your head. Because when you add what you were thinking plus Ryan plus Cindy, then we've got an awesome story.
No database will ever replace a human.
Mm-hmm.
At least I hope not. Not in my lifetime. The thought that occurs to me about the people posting the story, so the person who's actually posting it to the blog, is very similar to the person capturing the story and the person inputting the data, in my mind, in that it makes it easy. It gives me confidence. It says, here's how I do it. This is easy. There's something about that repeatability that for that person who's posting it.
And with systems checklists for everything, documenting the steps I need to do.
Yes.
It's never about, well, Tom's the guy who's posting the stories. It's like we have a system, and when Tom decides he's tired, we're not shit out of luck. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, it really makes it anybody can post.
Yeah.
The whole easy, confident, etc. So everything that we've been talking about before really applies here. The next big piece that we'll be talking about is what this will make possible for the people who are reading the stories, and there's a whole bunch of those. So there's the teachers, there's the people who are learning about, dogs, there's the people who are learning about catalytic thinking or catalytic decision making. And we do have time to go through those. And do you have to go, Cindy?
Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. What is standing out to you as you think about our time together today?
I really wish this detail went into a lot of meetings I had. And this level of thinking, and saying that, I realize that it's the framework that, like, remembering the purpose, remembering who it's for, and creating the best situation. It's just kind of confirming. For me, it's been confirming the structure as it is.
Yay.
Sorry, I have to jet, but it's raining.
I'm just so glad you're here. Go enjoy your family.
See you later.
Is there anything else that this makes possible for the person who's posting the story to the blog? It's easy, they can be confident, it's repeatable, anybody can post.
It creates connections at some point. I don't know how that happens yet, but
For the person who's actually posting it to the blog, doing the technical thing,
Oh,
talk.
the person that's helping the person that's doing this. Okay.
Yeah, the person who's actually inputting this into the blog where it's viewable.
I'm thinking for every person, including this person, is the power and potential that they're taking every single one of these stories into their life. They get to touch all the good. They get to see catalytic thinking in action all over the world. So not just the guy posting the story, I'm part of this team that's sharing it with the world. And oh my goodness, I get first dibs on this story sense, and I get to go home and talk about it tonight. So this, I'm thinking of the impact on every single person and what they talk about at dinner tonight for being a part of this.
Right. Right. And that's the power of the story, not so much the power of the template, but the power of the story, but also the power of the template, because they're seeing it repeated in the same way over and over and over again. They are learning. All right, so now the big one, the people reading the stories. What does this make possible for, what does this make possible for someone who is reading the story specifically because they want to learn about an aspect of catalytic thinking?
It gives them the space to learn, so that in a way that's supportive of their learning style.
They would see it in their own lives and then their own stories that they contribute.
And again, we're talking specifically about having a template where the same questions are asked in the same order every time, and presumably reported out in that way. Having that sort of formulaic template, what does that make possible for the reader who wants to learn catalytic thinking?
It demonstrates the framework in action over and over again. You know, whether I read one story or 20 stories, it's catalytic thinking in action. You know, documenting evidence that this framework works.
And it's again at that meta level where it is the actual framing of the story exemplifies. You know, Ryan, you said very, very early on that no matter who it is, would be learning catalytic thinking just by being exposed to it in this way. And I think at every point we're finding that.
And I think some of the openness that we always are continually pulling back the curtain, that the curtain will be pulled back on the template.
So there could be a blog post that shares the template, that every story has a link that says, here's why.
Yeah.
Ooh. More internal.
I still think that the entire website should be structured the same as the template somehow. To be determined.
Yeah, yeah. And then if you think our heads are exploding now,
and I think with that sharing of pulling back the curtain is also the invitation in a million different ways to the person reading the story. So the story and the template become also an on-ramp to a potential relationship with that person, you know, choosing to participate and contribute however they want. But one is also take the template. We want to share it with you, and here's why. If you want to talk with us about it, here's our names. We'd love to hear from you. You know, so it's also the on-ramp to, hey, you have a story. You know, if you want to print this out and sit with your story, or talk to us about your story and who the us is, with lots of faces, like we've always said, of the people we'd like, you know, who we are, and we want to talk to you, with you.
is it any different if they are trying to learn? So I want to know, I've heard about this catalytic listening thing. I want to see stories of catalytic listening, versus I'm coming on because I have been having trouble communicating with my teenager. What does having that template, that routine make possible for the person who is reading about a specific domain that they want to know about?
But it's not like the story is a static thing. Like it comes in and then that's what we work with the story. Once we have the story, like they're interfacing with the process when they give a story, but then they're going back into their own lives and continuing to live, and taking those principles that they learned from the template and from the process. Like, if you know, like for the example that you gave, if they went back and they were working with their kid, you know, that maybe they could communicate differently because they
Does the template make anything possible for that person that it doesn't make possible for that is different from the person who wants to learn about catalytic listening? A practice in the framework versus an issue in their life? Or is it the same?
say that again.
It does the template, the way in which the story will be told, will that, we said what that would make possible for somebody who wants to learn catalytic thinking practices is that template, the way the story is told, will demonstrate the framework in order over and over and over again, and invite people to think about the stories in their own lives in that way. Does that, what does that framing, that template, that this is the 6 questions that now I'm reading, not just capturing, is it different to what that makes possible for somebody who is having a problem with their teenager? Is there something special that makes possible for the person having a problem with their teenager?
Ideally, but it's a practice, right? Like if you're exposed to it one time, like you're not going to do it perfect. You're never going to do it perfect, right? That's the point. But like every time that you come back and participate in this community, you're going to get more opportunities to understand what is meant by catalytic thinking, and and then when you go back into your life separate from that, like you're gonna know it better and better and be able to implement it and then bring it back as a story, and then the whole, you know.
I feel like it depends on where they are, where people are on that continuum of learning. So it's like, you know, at the beginning of learning something, you're like, just tell me how to do it. I just want to know the steps so that I can practice doing the steps. And then a little bit later, you're like, why does that work every time? And then, then someone like Rebecca comes along and tells you, oh, that's because it's this part of the framework. That story talking about their kid at home, that's this part of the framework. And so it's like, it's, I think, where the reader is, or the experiencer is at. And then, so yes, I think the template would do different things for different people, but it could be the same template.
Because this is speaking specifically of the ingestion device or the template, but yet how that then outputs into a variety of things. So then there's the whole conversation around, not for today, around the outputs of in a yes and kind of way. Like what are, you know, there's the story and the questions of the story, yet there also could be things that would be footers to whatever a story is. You know, footers that help, and maybe that's tied to, yes, people can go look for other things, but are things categorically offered up also as, if this is sparking interest in catalytic listening, great way to get started in understanding the why behind that. If you're seeking certain, you know, certain indications when people may not know, oh, the intent is it's going to be something that's going to draw them back to click in and get involved in some kind of way. They're learning, sharing, connecting. But I just
or that they're going to take it and do something with it. And I'm dwelling in Ryan's observation that seeing the questions repeated over and over again, and that being the format that they're reading. So I've read six different stories about people having problems with their teenagers, and consistently I'm seeing this over and over and over again. And part of the template could be noting that this is a practice, but even just seeing it as a template makes them see that this is a practice. There's something in that that's really powerful. And that if they are at the just give me a tip and tool that I can use stage of the continuum, they're not even going to read that. They're not even going to see it. They're not even going to notice it. But if they're at the I'm going to try something new, or especially I'm ready to dive in stage along the continuum, they're going to see that. That's going to speak to them. There's something really, really powerful in that. In the seeing that this is a practice. And again, from internally, we could be mentioning that. That could be part of the template of the writing, which is that, you know, if this is intriguing to you, this is part of the practice of blank. You can learn more here, and noting that this is a practice. It's not a how-to. It's not a tip. It's not a. But I'm loving, Ryan, your observation that seeing it over and over and over again reinforces that this is a practice.
This is mildly related. Like, what are the limitations of what you guys can do with Zoom? Like, how are you able to incorporate that into your overall solution?
It's
like
a technology.
If somebody came to your website and they wanted to like be in a group of people working on something, how would they get into a meeting like this with other people that are interested?
Well, that is. We've got 5 minutes left. Let's hold off on that one.
The future state dream plan of like all of that, of like that highly networked platform of Zooms all across the world going on all the time.
Yeah, it is. That is a topic all unto itself, and one that we very, very much have been eager to get into ever since we started talking about the website. When was that? 2015? Not even going to go there. We do have 5 minutes left. We have almost. Do you guys have another 5 minutes? If we have another 5 minutes, we can finish up. Laura, do you? Okay, let's talk about teachers. Whether that teacher is somebody who's writing blog posts because that's teaching, or using it for immersion. What does our having a consistent template make possible for the teacher who's going to read it and use it as an example someplace?
A quick way to see, is this something usable for what I'm seeking?
Standardization.
Consistent tags, so they can group things together easily.
To search.
Mm-hmm. The people to connect with.
Mm-hmm.
And a mechanism to do the connecting. So if it's Ryan who wrote the story and I don't know Ryan, that it will tell me who to contact. Like, is Ryan okay with me reaching out, or do I need to go through Hildy, or like what's an easy protocol?
Yep. What else does it make possible for those teachers? Rebecca, do you remember what the first thing was you said? Because I didn't write it down.
When? A long time ago, or just?
No, just now. about teachers. Yes, when we first met, do you remember that?
I think it was like a quick way to see, is this relevant to what
There we go. Thank you. Yes.
What was the first thing you said to me ever?
You're the Hildy Gottlieb.
Probably is.
As opposed to me, I was like, who's Hildy Gottlieb?
Why am I going to this thing?
How did I get here?
Consistent tags for searching, people to connect with, quick to see if it's relevant. Is there anything else that having this repeated template makes possible for our teachers?
Well, I guess this is specifically related to something that the template would have on the backside is some place to capture the backstory of how the story came to be. You know, like Laura could say, like, because if we're going to maybe want to follow up with these people down the road or whatever it is, to have some kind of, how did this story come to be? This is Laura Steffen's yoga instructor. Or yes, and that wouldn't necessarily come through in the questions of the story, but it would be that backgrounder of how did this great story come into creating the future, the people.
That would be another thing that we would definitely want to have in a template, which could be somebody came up to Rebecca after she had talked at a community meeting, and here's what they shared. So having that context, I think, is going to be one of the template things that we're definitely going to want.
I think if the template is going to continue to evolve, like it's going to have to be, in a perfect world, like everybody would be influencing that, but probably in a realistic way, like just the like maybe that group of people would be like the people that are talking about that kind of stuff and like changing that, you know. So I think that having it be consistent like that, and them seeing like how it was working and like what people were saying and et cetera, then you have like a smaller group to put minds together and decide like what does that mean for the future of catalytic thinking.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a series of teams working on all the various aspects, with the coordinators of those teams coming together to coordinate among themselves, which will give the indications that, you know what, this team noticed that we're missing a question, or this team noticed that this question just isn't working, or yeah. The evolution is going to have to be built into the people infrastructure of how this is eventually working. We have addressed all of the for whoms along the with the exception of people submitting their own stories. And I think it's an amalgam of everything for people who are submitting their own stories, including, so people submitting their own stories, I think there's something about making it easy for them to do so. Encouraging them. We wouldn't get the story if it wasn't easy. What else does having the template make possible for people submitting their own stories? There's a piece in me that's thinking that it is a way of honoring them and making them feel invited.
And also giving them a learning experience while they do it. So just by walking through the template, to me to tell them, like, oh, Rebecca said I should share the story that I told her at this party. Okay, so walk through this, answer these questions, and then by the end I'm like, whoa, that worked really well. Wonder why.
Yeah, yep.
And I see this is like an invitation to an on-ramp to who the heck knows, all kinds of stuff. Like if somebody's submitting their own story to us from someplace in the world, and I know what condition we'll bake into the flowchart is they hear from a human after they submit the story. Like that's the start of a human relationship with them.
Yeah.
Unless they don't want to.
I love that. Like if you have like a way to capture stories, and then you have like somebody reaching out and following up with the person that submitted the story to ask more questions or to like start to create more of a relationship. Like I don't know. I've been thinking of this as like a technological solution, and that's just like common sense, you know, that somebody would talk to them more.
It's always about the people.
Yeah.
Okay, deep breath. In and out. If you've taken any notes, take a look. And as you think about it, what is jumping out at you from our conversation today?
You said that you started talking about revamping the website in 2015.
Maybe earlier.
Yeah, and that you're talking to Troy about it now. I would like to know more about that process. That interests me.
I put in my notes at last week's meeting, Ryan, to get you all the recordings from our Troy meetings. So I'm glad you noticed it or called that out this week. So now to do so.
You're gonna get like a big truck back up to your house. Here's some videotapes to watch from 2014.
You still have your beta player?
Have fun. We'll talk to you next week.
We'll talk to you next year.
I binge watched the movies all weekend long.
It's like, Ryan, is that your idea of like Netflix? It's like watching all the Creating the Future meetings that you can find.
Nancy Iannotti for fun watches our board meetings, so.
That's so great.
Our board meetings are fun. We ought to have one. What else is standing out to you guys?
I was, again, I get struck by this almost every time, but the answers, what does it make possible for whom? The answers were very similar, no matter who the for whom was. And it's because we have this vision of creating an experience of ease and curiosity. And so that weaves through every single answer. So it's kind of like, well, we can't really fail. Like, this may take a while, but it's going to be great. Yeah. So how can we make it? Then it becomes like the how-to part is, okay, how can we make it great right now, even though it's a teeny weeny thing, and then keep having it be great and greater and greater and greater as it gets more complex. That's the challenge. We don't want it to be great in 5 years. We want it to be great now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it actually already is great. So it's that idea of like, you're already perfect. You don't have to do anything.
Boy, why didn't you tell me that at the beginning? Rebecca, how about you?
I was reflecting on this team because this is catalytic thinking in action. You know, here's a group of people. Some did not know anyone before stepping into this team. And what, you know, when we say this shit works, it's like a bunch of people working on something really big together, and the gelling of the people when you make it about the people, which is not a surprise. Yet it's, again, we are evidence. Can someone out in the world see our story?
Yeah. Yeah. My reflection is very similar to Cindy's in that we have this tendency, especially when we're talking about something like telling stories, which always winds up falling under the marketing and communications department, when in fact sharing stories is our mission, and would be great if it was everybody's mission, sharing stories of what works and how people are learning. The problem when the sharing of stories is delegated to the marketing department is they're asking the question of, who's your target audience? And that's where the conversation goes. And some of these questions are asked and some of these questions are not asked, but it is automatically narrowed down to the target audience of who's your reader. And we miss all the rest of this. And this is so rich. And then what you wind up doing is patchworking, because the person who's inputting the data doesn't have what they need. And the person who's posting it to the blog doesn't have what they need. And the person who's, because we focused on that one tiny little narrow niche of people and a tiny little niche of what the questions are that we would ask them. And there's just such power in what we've created the whole ecosystem here. We've really looked at the entire ecosystem from the fact that somebody's told a story to the fact that somebody else can read that story, and all of the steps in between of what the ecosystem is that it takes to create that. You know, even just looking at this high level of what this makes possible for them, we already get an idea of what this thing could look like. And we haven't even talked about what the conditions are for success, which will really start to map out to the actions. Will definitely come down to, we've already started. I mean, so I'm just reflecting on the fact that once again, this shit is powerful. This is like really powerful stuff. So we will set another meeting to keep going. We will definitely want to talk with each of you so that each of you can feel like you can start getting to work right now, even while we're doing this. And setting something up for the middle of September when I get back from not breathing from the red tide in Florida. Any other comments for the good of the cause before we leave each other?
Enjoying it.
Have a good trip.
I will. Ryan, you have fun. I can't wait to hear about you playing at the fair.
Oh, fried butter. No.
We want to hear the most interesting new food on the market you found at the fair this time. Doesn't mean you had to consume it, just that you know.
Yeah, actually, we're asking that you please don't, because whatever it is
Yeah, it's probably bad for you.
It's not good for you. But
maybe you could take a picture of it.
Yeah.
There we go, and we'll put it in the database. Well, I am going to be taking much of what we did here and starting to put that into a template for whatever happens coming out of my time in Florida. And we'll see where that goes. I'll share with you guys what I create. I'll obviously share what comes out of it, and we'll be learning as we go here. And you guys all have a wonderful Labor Day weekend, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And thank you. This is really an awesome gift.
Thank you. It's good to see everybody.
You guys as well.
Bye.